remember just being a tourist in Australia and going past this tiny...
Terri Irwin has faced more heartbreak than most people could endure in a lifetime. She lost the love of her life in a tragedy that shocked the world, then spent nearly 2 decades carrying on alone while raising 2 young children under the public spotlight. Through it all, she rarely allowed anyone to see her break. She became a symbol of resilience, quietly dedicating every day to protecting wildlife and preserving Steve Irwin's legacy. But in October 2025, something happened that no one expected. It wasn't another conservation victory or a family milestone. It was a simple moment involving her son Robert that shattered years of carefully held emotions. As millions watched, Terri couldn't hold back the tears, because for one unforgettable moment, it felt as though Steve had returned. To understand why that moment meant so much, you have to look back at the remarkable journey that shaped Terri long before she ever became known as the wife of the crocodile hunter. Born in Eugene, Oregon, in 1964, Terri grew up in a household unlike any other. While most children spent weekends at playgrounds or shopping malls, Terri's home was filled with injured wildlife. Her father, Clarence, regularly rescued animals he found while driving his truck across America's highways. Foxes, raccoons, deer, and countless other creatures often ended up recovering in the family home. Instead of being frightened by wild animals, young Terri was fascinated by them. Caring for injured creatures quickly became second nature. By the time she was a teenager, the family property had evolved into a busy wildlife rehabilitation center. Terri spent countless nights bottle-feeding orphaned animals, cleaning enclosures, and learning how to care for creatures many adults wouldn't dare approach. While other teenagers worried about school dances or weekend plans, she was focused on saving lives. Her compassion wasn't something she learned later. It had been part of her since childhood. After graduating from high school, Terri didn't choose the traditional path. Instead of pursuing a comfortable career, she expanded her family's wildlife rescue efforts. She even organized truck drivers to report injured animals they found along their routes, creating an informal rescue network long before such programs became common. Every spare dollar she earned went back into caring for wildlife. One of her earliest rescues became especially meaningful. Using her own savings, Terri rescued a neglected cougar cub living in terrible conditions. Nursing that animal back to health convinced her she had found her life's purpose. Soon, her wildlife rehabilitation center was helping hundreds of injured animals every year. She worked exhausting overnight shifts at veterinary clinics before spending her days caring for wild animals that had nowhere else to go. Although she was even offered the opportunity to attend veterinary school, Terri made a surprising decision. Rather than spending years in classrooms, she chose to remain where she felt she was needed most. In the field, working directly with wildlife every single day. It was a choice that would eventually change her life forever. That life-changing moment arrived during a vacation to Australia in 1991. While visiting Queensland, Terri decided to stop at a small reptile park that most tourists would have overlooked. There, she watched a young wildlife expert performing crocodile demonstrations with an energy unlike anything she had ever witnessed. His enthusiasm wasn't an act. Every word he spoke reflected genuine love for the animals people usually feared. His name was Steve Irwin. For Steve, crocodiles weren't monsters. They were misunderstood creatures deserving of respect and protection. Watching him interact with these powerful reptiles, Terri immediately recognized something familiar. They shared the same mission, the same passion, and the same belief that wildlife deserved compassion rather than fear. The connection between them was instant. Only weeks after meeting, Steve flew halfway around the world to Oregon to surprise Terri. Arriving while she was busy caring for rescued animals, he proposed in the most Steve Irwin way imaginable. With complete sincerity and a rescued snake by his side, Terri accepted without hesitation. Their wedding in June 1992 looked nothing like a celebrity event. There was no glamorous honeymoon or luxury vacation. Instead, they headed straight into the Australian wilderness to film crocodile captures together. Those recordings unexpectedly became the foundation for what would later become the Crocodile Hunter, introducing millions of viewers to the adventurous couple whose passion for wildlife inspired audiences around the world. As the television series exploded in popularity, Steve and Terri became international icons. But behind the excitement and laughter shown on television were countless hardships that viewers rarely knew about. During one expedition, Terri suffered a heartbreaking miscarriage while deep in the Australian outback. Despite overwhelming grief, she quietly continued working alongside Steve without telling the film crew what had happened. On another assignment in Africa, an enormous hippopotamus charged directly at their vehicle, smashing the windshield and seriously injuring Terri. Steve desperately drove them to safety while trying to keep her conscious. The frightening incident never appeared on television. There were countless dangerous encounters with crocodiles, snakes, floods, and remote wilderness that the cameras never fully captured. Yet every challenge only strengthened their partnership. Their daughter Bindi arrived in 1998, bringing new joy to the family. 5 years later, in December 2003, their son Robert was born. Steve immediately introduced both children to the family's unique way of life. They weren't simply visitors at Australia Zoo. They were part of its daily rhythm from the beginning. One famous photograph showed Steve holding baby Robert while feeding a crocodile. Although it sparked public controversy, the image perfectly represented how inseparable family and conservation had become for the Irwins. Behind the scenes, however, Terri faced another private struggle. After Robert's birth, she battled severe postpartum depression, something she would only speak about publicly many years later. Caring for 2 young children while balancing wildlife conservation left her emotionally exhausted. One frightening incident involving a snapping turtle coming dangerously close to baby Robert haunted her for years afterward. The experience intensified her already fierce determination to protect her children at all costs. Then came the day that changed everything. On September 4, 2006, Steve was filming near Australia's Great Barrier Reef for a documentary when tragedy struck. While swimming near a large stingray, the animal unexpectedly lashed out with its barb, inflicting a fatal injury to Steve's chest. The crew rushed him back to the boat and fought desperately to save his life, but nothing could be done. Back at Australia Zoo, Terri received the devastating phone call that every spouse fears. Within minutes, she chartered a private aircraft and raced to be with her husband, hoping against hope that somehow the reports were wrong. They weren't. Steve Irwin was gone at only 44 years old. The loss sent shockwaves across the globe. Millions mourned the adventurous conservationist who had inspired generations to appreciate wildlife. But no one felt that pain more deeply than the woman who had shared every dangerous expedition, every dream, and every victory with him. Terri suddenly found herself raising 2 children alone. Bindi was only 8 years old. Robert hadn't even turned 3. He would grow up with almost no personal memories of the father the world adored. Instead, Steve would live on through photographs, television episodes, family stories, and the unwavering determination of the woman who refused to let his legacy disappear. For Terri, every birthday, every holiday, and every milestone became another reminder of the empty space Steve should have occupied. Yet despite unimaginable grief, she made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She would keep moving forward, not only for Steve's dream, but for the 2 children who still needed her more than ever. For years, Terri Irwin carried a responsibility few people could truly understand. She wasn't simply preserving Steve Irwin's memory for the millions of fans who admired him. She was preserving him for 2 children who had lost their father far too soon. Every photograph she saved, every story she told, every old video she replayed became another piece of Steve that Bindi and Robert could hold on to. For Robert, that task was especially difficult. He was just 2 years old when Steve died. Unlike his sister, he couldn't remember family holidays or conversations with his father. He didn't remember Steve teaching him about crocodiles or carrying him through Australia Zoo. His understanding of his dad came entirely from the memories of other people. Growing up under those circumstances created a unique challenge. Around the world, millions of people remembered Steve Irwin vividly. They laughed at his television adventures, quoted his famous catchphrases, and spoke about him as though they had personally known him. Yet the person who perhaps wanted those memories most, his own son, had almost none. Instead, Robert learned about his father piece by piece. His mother described Steve's kindness behind the cameras. Bindi shared stories from her childhood that Robert had been too young to experience. Old home videos filled in some of the gaps, allowing him to watch moments that he couldn't consciously remember living through. Little by little, those stories stopped feeling like history. They became part of who Robert was. As he grew older, it became increasingly clear that he had inherited more than just Steve's appearance. He possessed the same fascination with wildlife, the same natural confidence around dangerous animals, and the same ability to make people care about conservation simply by speaking from the heart. But Robert never wanted to become a copy of his father. Instead, he quietly built his own identity. While continuing the conservation work Steve had begun, Robert also developed a remarkable talent for wildlife photography. His stunning images earned international recognition, capturing endangered species and remote landscapes with a perspective uniquely his own. At the same time, he became an increasingly powerful voice for environmental protection. Whether speaking to school children or world leaders, Robert communicated with sincerity rather than performance. Instead of relying on his famous last name, he earned respect by demonstrating genuine knowledge, patience, and compassion. Those closest to the family noticed something else as well. As the years passed, Robert naturally began taking on more responsibility around Australia Zoo. He worked alongside veterinarians, cared for animals, supported conservation programs, and became one of the organization's most recognizable ambassadors. Terri never pressured him into following Steve's path. She had always encouraged both of her children to choose their own futures. The fact that Robert embraced wildlife conservation so completely was entirely his own decision. Watching him mature brought Terri both comfort and heartbreak. Sometimes Robert's smile reminded her of Steve. Other times it was his laughter. Occasionally it was the way he spoke passionately about crocodiles or reached instinctively toward an unfamiliar animal without fear. Those tiny moments often caught her by surprise. They weren't exact copies of Steve, but they carried unmistakable echoes of the man she had loved. Still, Robert remained uniquely himself. Where Steve's energy had been loud and explosive, Robert's confidence was quieter. He listened carefully before speaking. His enthusiasm felt calm rather than overwhelming. Yet audiences connected with him for exactly the same reason they had connected with his father. Everything came from the heart. By 2025, Robert had become one of the most recognizable young conservationists in the world. Millions followed his work online. His wildlife photography appeared in major publications. His conservation campaigns reached audiences across multiple continents. Most importantly, he inspired a new generation to care about protecting wildlife. For Terri, every achievement represented another reminder that Steve's dream had survived. Then came the evening that changed everything. In October 2025, Robert appeared on live television before a packed audience. At first, it seemed like an ordinary interview. He discussed conservation, Australia Zoo, and his recent projects with the same warmth viewers had come to expect. Eventually, as so often happens during interviews, the conversation turned toward Steve. Robert had answered questions about his father countless times before. Usually, he responded with calm professionalism, expressing gratitude for Steve's legacy while quickly shifting attention back toward wildlife conservation. This time felt different. Something about the atmosphere allowed his emotions to surface naturally. Instead of offering polished answers, Robert spoke honestly about what it meant to grow up knowing someone mostly through stories. He explained that every old photograph and every family memory had helped him slowly discover the father he never truly had the chance to know. Then he turned his attention toward the woman who had made that possible. His mother. Robert spoke about everything Terri had sacrificed after Steve's death. She hadn't simply continued running Australia Zoo. She had protected an entire legacy. She had comforted 2 grieving children while carrying unimaginable grief herself. She had fought legal battles to defend conservation land. She had expanded wildlife hospitals. She had dedicated every day to ensuring Steve's mission never ended. As Robert spoke, emotion entered his voice. He admitted that every major milestone in his life carried one unavoidable thought. His father should have been there. Graduations, career achievements, television appearances. Every important moment contained an empty space that could never truly be filled. But then Robert shared something even more powerful. Although Steve couldn't stand beside him, one person never failed to. Terri. She had been there through every challenge, every success, every disappointment, every victory. When Robert looked into the audience, his eyes found his mother. The cameras immediately followed. Terri was already crying. She tried to smile through the tears, but the emotions became too overwhelming. For nearly 2 decades, she had remained remarkably composed in public. She had spoken about Steve countless times. She had attended memorials, interviews, documentaries, and public events honoring his life. Yet nothing compared to hearing her son acknowledge everything she had quietly carried alone. The audience grew completely silent. Many people wiped away tears of their own. It wasn't simply Robert honoring his father. It was a son recognizing the extraordinary woman who had guided him through unimaginable loss. For Terri, that moment represented something much deeper than grief. It was proof. Proof that despite every fear she'd carried since Steve's death, her children had grown into compassionate, resilient adults. She had often wondered whether Robert would feel incomplete because he barely remembered his father. Watching him speak with such maturity answered that question. Steve's influence had never disappeared. It had simply reached Robert through a different path. Through family stories, through love, through years of patient guidance. In many ways, Robert had become exactly what Steve would have hoped. Not because he copied his father, but because he embraced the same values while remaining authentically himself. That realization finally broke through Terri's emotional defenses. The tears weren't only about loss. They were about pride, relief, gratitude. After 19 years of wondering whether she'd done enough, she saw the answer standing on that stage. Her son had become a remarkable man. Today, Robert continues expanding conservation projects around the world while inspiring millions to care about wildlife. Bindi continues raising her own family while carrying forward the Irwin mission, and Terri remains the quiet strength holding everything together. Steve Irwin may no longer be here to witness the family he loved so deeply, but his legacy didn't end with his life. It lives in every rescued animal, every protected habitat, every child inspired to protect nature, and every member of the Irwin family who continues dedicating their lives to the cause that brought them together. Perhaps that was the true reason Terri cried that evening. She wasn't seeing the past return. She was witnessing something even more beautiful. She was watching the future Steve dreamed of unfolding right before her eyes, and realizing that everything they had fought for was still alive.